On this episode, episode 36 of Winning the Moment, we have Aimee Stephens, and we are going to talk about her new book, Turning Pain into Purpose, and an incredible new course she has about a healing journey. Aimee shares a lot of vulnerable and challenging moments that she went through in her childhood. It's a message you're not going to want to miss. Stay tuned, like and subscribe, and most of all, enjoy the episode. Wherever you are and however you are listening, thank you for being back with us on another episode of Winning the Moment. Today, I have another author with me. Her name is Aimee Stephens, and she has just finished her book, Turning Pain into Purpose. And today, I'm going to let her kind of tell her story that made this book a reality. So, Aimee, thank you so much for being here.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. I'm so excited to be here.
Well, and we can talk a little bit about the book, too, before we get into the story. But we had kind of off camera had said, originally, you're going to do the published route, and then now you're thinking about maybe doing the self-published route. And I was so conflicted on that when I did mine, thinking you got to have a publisher, it's never going to make it.
Yeah.
And there were certainly some benefits to having a publisher because it just put me everywhere. So like it's in 33,000 different outlets. Anywhere that you look it up, you're going to find it. That's all great. But it's not like that really translates into the sales because if people don't know what the book is, it doesn't matter. They're not looking for it. But what's so cool about self-publishing now is you can have it all print on demand. So you don't have to go and like buy a bunch of books. You can just have them on Amazon, and then as people buy them, they'll just print them for you and send them. And I'll have to hook you up with my contact, Ashley, because she knows how to work all of the it's almost like the algorithm of Amazon. Because if you can become a bestseller on Amazon, then they'll start to recommend your books when people are looking for other books that are similar.
Oh, I love
and that's so important because if you don't get that, the only way anyone's ever going to find your book is if they know to look for it. But once you hit that bestsellers list, because if you're looking at a book on Amazon, it'll show like 5 at the bottom.
Yep.
So then Amazon will start recommending you down there.
Oh, I love that. Okay.
And there's another person I'll connect you with too, Jason, because he did his book self-published and he figured out that print-on-demand thing in a really good way. So I'll connect you with both of them. And do you have a hope for when you want that to come out?
You know what? Honestly, I would love it to just be as soon as it can be ready to go. Like it's written. I do want to have an editor take a look at it, but pretty much it's ready to go.
And you wrote it all yourself?
I wrote it all myself. It's 75,000 words. Like it's a good book.
How many pages is that?
I'm not actually entirely sure yet. Kind of probably depends on font, I'm sure, and other stuff. But yeah. So whatever it ends up being, it'll be. But I'm excited to get it out there.
Are you a writer by nature?
You know what? I love writing. I love articulating myself. I love talking. And so I think for me, like when I started putting pen to paper, so to speak, it just came so naturally for me to talk about things that I was so passionate about.
Yeah.
And so it flowed. I'll put it that way. Like this book very much flowed for me.
Did you type it all, or did you write some of it, or did you dictate some of it? What was your process?
Okay, a lot of that. So I do a lot of journaling in the morning. In fact, I'll talk about a really cool journaling thing I just came out with. But I do a lot of journaling in the morning, and that's really how it all started. Is I just started journaling so much, and I realized like I really want to help people with the.
Are you journaling with a pen and paper?
No, with my phone typically.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, some with pen and paper.
Yeah.
Some on my computer. Some with just my phone. And then it just started coming to me and flowing, and I just started writing and writing and writing. And I would even be like middle of the day, and I'd have all these ideas come to me, and I would start journaling. So it's like I basically took all these journaling.
Wow.
And just put it together and just started organizing it, and then I got very intentional about writing it as a book.
So did it really start as just a journaling practice, and then it turned into the book?
Yes.
Wow, that's kind of cool.
Now, I will say I was very intentional. Like 15 years ago, after I really started this healing journey, after I went through that, I was like, one day I'm going to write a book about this, how much this has changed my life. Because I was just so passionate about how much my life had changed after going through this healing process. And so I knew one day I wanted to share it. That was 15 years ago. I didn't know when that would be.
Yeah.
So.
I want to talk more about, and we'll probably let you tell some of your story first, but what that healing journey means to you and like what that was specifically. Like what are the things you did to heal? And you talked about doing a course too, which I think is so important. That's if I could go back and do my book over again, what I would have done is had a course to go with the book, because you're going to ask everyone that you know to support you when the book comes out. You might as well have a couple things that they can support you on, because you're not going to make a lot of money on the book anyways.
Right, absolutely,
right?
yeah.
But a course is completely different. And And if you're going to ask every single person you know to support you, you might as well have a couple other offerings. I think that's something that if you're working on the course now, I'd definitely launch those two together.
That's what I'm trying to do. And I'll tell you how the course came about is after I wrote the book and I started sharing my book. I mean, I haven't had people read it, but just talking about it.
Yeah.
And then when I did this other podcast a few months ago, I had people reaching out to me like, when's your book getting published? I want to read this. I want to like have this impact my life. And what I really realized is I want a way for people to do what I did for themselves. And so how can I create something that isn't just a book? It's something that's like actionable, right?
Like a healing journey,
like
you're
a
saying?
healing journey.
Yeah.
And so that's what this whole course is about, is taking people through this journey of why do you need to heal? What does healing look like for you? How does that impact your life? And then ultimately by the end of this course, how can I change my life because of my healing journey? So that's really what I'm excited about, is just giving people something actionable that they can do, not just like, hey, you need to heal. We all need to heal, right? We're all healing from something. So
I think that's great. That's awesome. So let's talk a little bit about what the book is about. I know you've got a story to share, and we've had lots of people share challenging things that have happened in their life on this podcast, but I think this is one that no one up to this point has spoken about, but I think it's an important message that needs to be shared. So I'll kind of let you just take it from there and share your story, and I'll just interject when I've got questions.
No, that's great. Thank you so much. So really my story began when I was about 12 years old. And this is something I waited years and years to talk about, to share, for multiple reasons. One, I really had forgotten about it. I was told to forget about it as a child, and so I did. And what happened to me when I was 12 is my older brother, he was about 4 years older than me, he got curious and needed to explore that, and explored that with me. And so he would sneak into my room at night when he thought everybody was asleep, myself included. He would sneak into my room at night and he would touch me all over my body. And I was this 12-year-old little girl. I didn't know what to do. So what I did is I froze.
Even that first time, you weren't even like, hey, what are you doing? Because it was just like you were.
I didn't even. I can remember the first time, to be honest.
Really?
And I froze. I didn't know what was happening. I mean, it was my older brother, and I remember him sneaking into my room and putting his hands underneath my clothes, and I just almost get emotional when I talk about that, because I didn't, like now, right, as a grown, confident woman, I'd be like, get the hell away from me.
Yeah.
But like, as that little girl in my bed, I didn't know what to do, and so I did nothing.
And it's your older brother.
And it's my older brother, right?
Yeah.
And so I didn't know, like, what is he doing? What's happening? What is this? And then it just kind of kept going on and on for a while until it suddenly stopped. But during that time, so many things happened because, okay, so let's talk about, and this, I like to talk about these details, even though they're difficult details to talk about, and probably a lot of people don't talk about them. It's so important when it comes to sexual abuse to talk about this kind of stuff, because it's real.
Yeah.
How it impacts girls, boys, whoever.
Well, I can't even imagine your sleep schedule, because if you went to bed knowing that it could happen, not that it would happen, but that it could, I mean, that had to just all day leading up till nighttime, even,
fear.
Like
fear every night when I went to bed. Is he coming in? Is he not?
I couldn't imagine the impact on just your mental psyche for that.
Absolutely. It was just, it's like my whole world changed. Like I talk a lot about this in my book. It's like I went from this curious, vibrant 12-year-old girl who just had so much energy to like, who am I? What's happening to me? What's going on? Feeling like I was keeping this secret. I grew up in a very strict religious home, and that had major lasting effects on me.
I was going to ask, so did you grow up LDS?
Yeah.
Is that why you think you didn't say anything?
Yeah. Oh, 100%. For multiple reasons. Just honestly, like the way my parents handled it. And, God bless my parents. They did the very best that they could. And I will say back in the 80s and 90s, most parents handled it this way. So I don't fault them for that back then, but they didn't know what to do. And so they really did nothing. And my life.
How did they find out, your parents?
So after months of this going on, my brother went to them because he wanted to go on an LDS mission, and he knew he needed to, quote, quote, repent to go on his LDS mission. So he went to the bishop, he went to my parents and said, this is what I've done.
I guess that's a positive. Because without the mission, then who's to say you would have stopped?
Who's to say how long ago or how long it would have lasted?
Right.
And so I remember my parents sitting me down on the couch. I was in the corner of the couch. They're on the other side of the couch. And they just said, your brother went to the bishop. He repented. God's forgiven him. You need to forgive him. We're going to pretend this never happened. And I just said, okay. And that was the end of it.
That's terrible.
It was terrible because, and here's,
that's a part of that. Within that church, a lot of times the difficult things are like put it on a shelf and leave it up there.
Let's forget it ever happened. And I remember my parents saying, we have a good family, and we did, we had a great family, but they're like, we don't ever want to talk about this again. and we're just going to go back to being a happy family. And I was like, okay, let's go back to being a happy family. But my world turned upside down.
Yeah, right. Of course.
And now here I am almost.
That's sickening. That's so
Right?
challenging.
Because now I'm almost this 13-year-old girl. First of all, my body is completely awake
going
now.
into puberty.
Going into puberty. I was in puberty. Sexually, I had woken up with no resources, no help, no way to understand what was going on inside my body.
And a religion that says that all that's evil and bad.
So I went to church every week feeling like I was going to hell.
Yeah, I bet.
Learning about what they call the law of chastity in the LDS religion, and feeling like at 12 I had broken the law of chastity when I had done nothing wrong, but feeling like it was my fault.
Yeah.
It was just like there were just so many things wrong with it. I didn't know how to navigate the sexual feelings I was having at that point. So now here I am, 13 years old. All my friends are talking about cute boys, and I'm like, when do I get to be touched again? Because it felt good. And this is the damage, right? This is what's so damaging about sexual abuse, especially with a family member, with anyone. But I had been sexually aroused by my brother.
Yeah.
That's a real problem for a young girl who doesn't know how to navigate that.
Right. And you don't even want to talk to about it.
Oh, that is the last thing I want
So did you not,
talk about.
your parents didn't get you any therapy or anything like that?
It wasn't even offered to me. I didn't know I needed it. They didn't know I needed it.
Well, of course, yeah. As a 12-year-old, you wouldn't be
Why would I know that?
Yeah, of course.
So I got no help. I never talked.
So you really just had to deal with it. So I guess your only solution was to just forget it.
Just forget it. Just forget it ever happened. But here's the ripple effect. When I started having relationships at 16, every single relationship with a boy that I was in, and then eventually men, was nothing but toxicity.
Well, yeah, because you have that damage you haven't fixed yet.
No help, no resources, so sexually confused in so many ways, maturing sexually at a very young age, but not emotionally maturing at a young age. So that combo was so destructive.
Do you think it stinted your emotional development while it enhanced your sexual development? So then it was like at this total, where this is down and this is up, that's even worse.
It's even worse. And here's what's even worse about that. I thought I was mature emotionally because I was mature sexually. So now, not only was I not mature emotionally, but I thought I was. That's
right, because at that age, you just think, well, if I'm mature sexually, then of course I'm emotionally equipped for it too.
Yeah. So the ripple effect in high school, I wasn't interested in boys my age. I was interested in older men. I dated a 21-year-old when I was 16. My parents allowed that.
Wow.
Right. And again, they didn't know better back then, but, we do know better now. So that's why I like to talk about this.
Did you keep going to church through all of that, through all of high school? When did you stop?
I stopped going to church about 10 years ago. And for me, it was a very personal choice because there were just things that I just no longer believed in. And it's been a very good life decision for me. I'm very happy. And I'm a very spiritual person. So it actually had nothing to do with my spirituality, but just some beliefs. Yeah.
Yeah. Wow. Man, I can't believe that your parents said just forget it.
Yeah.
So what did your relationship with your brother look like after that?
Honestly, it was fine because we were told to pretend it never happened. So that's what we did. I pretended that we had a normal relationship, but we really didn't, to be honest. It was awkward for a lot of years. And we really don't have much of a relationship now, which is fine.
How does he feel now that you're sharing the story?
I don't know. We don't talk. But it's my story to share.
Right.
And this is, and I mean, if I could put a message out there to people too, it's like, hey, if you have a story to share, share it. This is my story to share. And I'm sharing it because I want to help other people. Yeah. Is it going to impact my life? Yeah. May it impact his? Maybe. Depends on how he handles it. But I'm not worried about that. I'm here to share a story that will help impact other people's lives. And that's what I want to do.
So do you have no relationship with him now, really?
Yeah, but to be honest, it has nothing to do with that. It actually has just more to do with who we are now as people.
Okay.
So, I'm just a big believer. It's as I've grown, as I've evolved, as I've healed, I've really learned this beautiful thing called boundaries.
Yeah.
And boundaries exist because you need them in your life to be happy. And if there's someone in your life that doesn't bring joy and happiness and there's a toxicity there for whatever reason, that's what boundaries are for. So I have that boundary there with him because of that.
Yeah, no, I always tell people, don't get caught up thinking because it's your family, you have to have a relationship with them. If they don't serve you, then you don't have to.
I mean, honestly, I am such a believer in that. I have an amazing stepdaughter. She's not my blood, but I've practically raised her since she was younger, and I love her just as much as my 3 other daughters that I did give birth to. So for me, blood it's simply that. It's blood. Yeah. It's just because he's my brother. If that relationship doesn't serve me in my life, I don't want it.
So you said that it took a while before you ever talked about it. How long did you go before you actually spoke to someone about your abuse?
Yeah. So here's what's interesting about it. It would come up from time to time. Like, I will say one thing with my brother. He did bring it up a couple times as we got older. And he's like, hey, I'm sorry about that thing that happened when we were kids. And I was like, oh, no big deal, whatever. I just never wanted to talk about it. So
especially with him.
With him, I didn't want to talk about it with him. So, he did apologize. Like, he tried to, like, make amends, so to speak, for that. But it wasn't, like, I just didn't want to talk about it, right? I wasn't
Well,
given
who wants to
help.
talk to their abuser about their abuse?
Right. Thank you for saying that. Nobody does.
Yeah, that's like the very last person on the list of all the people in the world you'd want to talk to about it.
Exactly. Thank you. That he was the last person I wanted to talk to, and he was the only one that had brought it up. My parents never, ever brought it up again. No one else knew about it. Nobody else brought it up again. And so I just never got talked about. And so it just kind of like slowly slipped out of the memory, so to speak. But what was happening in my life was 20 years of toxic relationships.
Yeah.
Just over and over and over again. And so when this really got dealt with, so I was about 31, 32, and I was in a very unhealthy relationship, a very unhealthy marriage for about 12 and a half years. And here's the crazy part. I had been to multiple counselors. One, they were marriage counselors. Two, they were LDS recommended counselors. They weren't trained in early childhood trauma. So this never came out in therapy.
No way.
Never came out in therapy. Even though I had
Interesting.
been to multiple.
Is that on the therapist or is that on you?
I think it's both.
Yeah.
And I think it's the fact that I wasn't bringing it up. So the reason that the therapist I went to knew to bring it up was because I was talking about this unhealthy marriage I was wanting to exit. And she started digging. So kind of what happened there was I was recommended to her from a friend. And I was talking to my friend about my marriage and just saying, it's not good. And she's like, you really need to see like a different therapist. So she goes, I have one that I think you'll love. So I just was like, okay. And I called her just out of the blue and I scheduled an appointment. And I went in to see her and she goes, why are you here? I said, I've been in this marriage for 12 and a half years and it's really not good. And I need to know how to get out of it. I didn't even know I could get out of this marriage. That was ingrained.
That's
in
such
me.
an interesting question to say. I need to figure out how to get out of it because obviously you know how to get out of it.
Like now I would tell someone, freaking leave.
Yeah, right.
Leave.
Yeah.
But it's almost like I didn't feel like I could. And that is the byproduct.
Did you feel like as a part of that because you felt like you had to be a victim? Like, because that's just who you were now?
I think subconsciously I was very much a victim in every aspect of my life.
So you'd find any opportunity to be a victim, you would subconsciously because that's who you felt you were.
Yeah, and I think that's the important distinction. It's subconscious. So if anyone's listening to this, they're like, I'm not doing that. You might be.
Yeah, well, the subconscious drives 80-90% of what we do anyway.
Yeah.
So unfortunately, our subconscious is ruling our roost.
It is.
You know?
It's a great way to say it.
It decides most of the things for us.
Absolutely. So subconsciously, I had been this victim for 20 years.
Yeah.
And so, yes, I'm in this horrible 12 and a half year marriage.
What was so horrible about it?
Oh, so many things. It just was unhealthy from the very beginning. Obviously, I had stuff in my life I hadn't worked through. He definitely had some issues, and he brought those into the marriage, and it was bad. It was just bad from the very beginning without going into too much detail there. It was just a very unhealthy, toxic marriage. So it just needed to end. And I didn't even know how to get out of it. Like, it was just that bad.
And you had kids with that husband?
3 girls.
3 girls.
Yeah. And so when I went to this therapist, she said, let's start with just give me like the breakdown. Tell me about this marriage. So I spent a half an hour just walking her through the last 12 and a half years. So I get to the end of this and I'm like, what do I do? And she's like, you leave because it's horrible. She said, you need to get out of this marriage. But she goes, my bigger question, and this is where I believe the right therapist knows where to start digging. She goes, what I want to understand, what's wrong with you? Why did you stay in this marriage for 12 and a half years?
Wow.
That was the first time someone had like put it back on me.
Yeah.
So here, right, my subconscious victim mentality, now someone's throwing it back in my face.
Yeah, what a great question.
Why did you choose to stay in this horrible situation for 12 and a half years? She goes, should you leave? Yes, leave tomorrow, please. But what I now want to understand, we're going to put that on the shelf now that we know that that needs to happen. What I want to understand is what kept you here? So the next question she asked me, she goes, just walk me through all your relationships with men since you started dating at 16 or whatever. I got married at 20. So it's not like it's some big window, right?
Yeah.
So, 4 or 5 relationships, whatever it was. I start telling her, and okay, so first off, no one had ever asked me this question. Not one counselor.
Well, yeah, you've never been in. I guess you could have at the other therapist. They just never did.
Yeah, they never did. They never walked through this with me.
What do you think would be relevant if you're in a marriage counseling to understand previous relationships?
Right. And this is where I just truly believe you go to the right therapist with the right education who knows how to really do that deep work. Like you'll get answers.
Were your other therapists men or women?
Both.
Both.
Yeah. But they were trained in family therapy, right? Couples therapy.
Yeah.
Not like, let's dig into your past to see what's going on in your life. So I start telling her about these other relationships, and she looks at me and she's like, have you ever had a healthy relationship with a man? And I was like, no one's ever asked me that. And no, I have not. And that was the first time I had been presented with this question.
Yeah.
And that was the first time I had really sat there and thought to myself, oh my hell, I have never been in a good, healthy relationship with a good man.
And you're like, what, 31 at this time?
31.
And how old is your oldest daughter at that time?
I had her at 22.
So she's like 8?
8, yeah.
Okay, and your youngest is how old?
At that point, she was probably 2 or 3, probably 3. So I think it was like 8, 5, and 3 were my 3 girls.
Yeah.
And I mean, talk about a slap in the face, right?
Yeah.
At 31 years old, you're realizing you've never been in a good relationship with a good man. So after we kind of diagnosed this, basically, she says to me, what happened to you when you were a child? And the first thing out of my mouth was nothing. I said nothing. I said, I grew up in a great home, great Mormon family.
Wow. Why do you think that is?
Because
it was that far back.
It was that far back, that far removed. I hadn't talked about it in years. It hadn't come up. It wasn't even in my realm of like.
Wasn't even like you're trying to be dishonest.
No, I was like, no, nothing happened to me. I grew up in a great home. I had a great family, great parents. And she's like, no. She goes, I've done this work way too long to know that I absolutely promise you that something happened. She goes, maybe it was small. And this is the thing with trauma that a lot of people don't understand. Sometimes it can be really small trauma things that happen when you're young, but because your young little child brain processes it the way that it does, it actually develops as pretty significant trauma. Now, obviously what happened to me was bigger than that, but that's what sometimes people don't understand about childhood trauma is it can actually, even though it may not be that big, it can have a big effect on your life.
Yeah.
But obviously mine was bigger than that. And so after literally 20 minutes of probing, I was like, oh, wait a minute. There was this one thing that happened with my older brother, but I'm like totally dealt with it. Totally fine. She goes, could you tell me about that, please? Like almost like, okay, this is interesting. So I told her what happened and she was like, yeah, I think we have something here. And it literally went from me going to see her once to get marital advice to I was in her office now twice a week for a year.
Wow.
Working through this trauma that I had never worked through. And it was a lot of work, a lot of trauma work, a lot of going back to my past, reliving it. Like you almost have to relive it to like let it go because so much guilt, so much shame, so many things I had carried with me for 20 plus years because of it. It was painful.
And so how long from that meeting did you stick with your husband before you left?
Oh, no, it was right away. Like I literally went home from that first appointment. She goes, the next time I see you, you better have paperwork filed. And I did. Wow. Like I went home and called a friend of mine whose father was an attorney.
So that therapist was unbelievably impactful in your life.
She passed away this year. And I cry every time I think about her because she changed my life in every way. And I think the best way I can describe it is at 31 years old, she gave me a new lens to look at life through. Yeah. A lens I had never been given up until that point. So many things that were just part of my life that I didn't even know were toxic and bad. And I was just going through the motions, living life, unhappy, miserable, a victim in every way. And she changed everything for me by holding that mirror up to my face and saying, Aimee, what is going on in your world because you're choosing it. And until you choose a different path and you are aware of what happened to you, nothing's going to change.
That's amazing that she was able to make such a positive impact in your life.
She changed my life. I adore her in every way. And it was really hard when she died this year.
But what was it that she passed from?
She got in a car accident.
Oh, man.
Yeah. And she was older. I think she was almost 80 when she passed away. She was the sharpest, brilliant woman and just had such a huge impact on my life. And I stayed in touch with her these last 15 years. We were very close. In fact, she's the only person that's ever read my book. I gave it to her for Christmas the year that I wrote it a couple years ago. And she's the only one that's ever read it.
Wow. Okay. So then getting on the timeline. So this is like 31. You go and you tell your husband you're leaving. How did he take that? Was he like, oh, yeah.
It did not go well.
Oh, it didn't.
No. And I will tell you, like I was I was in a very toxic place myself. I had so much to figure out because I suddenly know now why I stayed in this toxic marriage for 12 and a half years doesn't mean I was instantly fixed.
Of course.
I had so much to heal from, so much to figure out. I was going through some very toxic behavior of my own that I was trying to work through. The divorce was ugly. It was very challenging. It was very difficult. It was very painful. And a lot of that was my doing. I was making some very poor choices at the time. And here's what was fascinating. I was working through that trauma. I was working through those choices with her. And a lot of those choices were coming from the fact that at 12 years old, I did not know how to say no to a man.
Yeah.
And so I had to work through a lot of stuff with her.
Yeah.
It was painful.
And then, so how long did it take for you to be on your own?
Oh, probably just a few months.
Okay.
I mean, I wouldn't say it was like super drawn out because it was like the minute I filed paperwork, we kind of figured everything out. He moved out, then he moved back in, then he moved back out, then I finally moved out, and then it was final. So I'd probably say start to finish was about 4 months. And
when did you tell your daughters what happened to you? How old were they when you shared it with them?
That is such a good question. To be honest, I don't even know of a date because I've been talking to them about this topic for years.
Yeah.
And I am so passionate about this because this is how you do not pass on generational trauma is you teach and talk to your kids about this kind of stuff. They have to know about it. The awareness has to be there.
That's why I wondered, because your oldest was 8 at the time when you finally spoke about it. And so I wondered how soon after that did you...
I probably have been talking to my girls about this since I felt like they were old enough to hear it. Let me put it that way. Yeah. So probably, if I had to guess, probably 12, 13 age. Yeah. I've been talking to them about it for a long time because the awareness is so important, especially for girls that might get stuck in situations. And it's still happening. I mean, since my first podcast, I have gotten so many messages from women that are like, this happened to me, or young girls that are like my daughter's age that are saying, this happened to me and I never talked about it. Like, it's happening all the time. And I want women to know you can heal from this, but you got to talk about it. You've got to deal with it. You've got to get it out, and then you can heal from it.
Oh, yeah. I had a friend who just did a post on social media a few months ago, and she was assaulted by a famous DJ, and she never did anything about it either. Like, she didn't go get a rape kit. She didn't tell authorities. Like, She just didn't know what to do, So I think there's so many women, from little girls to even grown women who just get in that situation, feel helpless, and don't know what to do.
It's embarrassing. We're violated. Our bodies are violated. It's incredibly embarrassing to talk about. And you feel so much shame and guilt. You feel like it's your fault.
Sure.
And I felt like it was my fault for so many years. I literally thought I was going to hell my entire childhood.
Yeah, that had to be so confusing.
So confusing.
So now talking about your healing journey, so that seems like that therapist was the start of it.
Very
and then
so.
What other things did you do in that process to get healed?
It was such a beautiful time for me. Like, I look back on that time in my life, it was so much love and gratitude because I'm now out of this marriage, right? For the first time in my adult life, I'm alone. Like,
yeah.
Wow, right? First time I'm adult,
First time ever in your life, probably, right? Because it was from your being with your family to being with your husband to...
Yes. First time I'm alone ever. I had time to heal. I did a ton of journaling. I did a ton of inner work that she was giving me stuff to work on. I mean, like I said, I was in her office twice a week for almost an entire year going through this. And, now at this point, we're divorced. So he has the girls every other weekend. And so I use that time to really go inward and to do this work and to figure out, like, who am I? What do I want? And then once I had done enough healing, she had me start dating because she's like, you've never dated in a healthy way. And we're now going to do this. You're going to go through this process of dating in a healthy way. And I did that for quite a few months. And then I ended up meeting my second husband, and we had a beautiful, wonderful marriage. But it was just... For me, it all started.
Did you say had a beautiful marriage?
Yeah, so we're not married anymore.
Oh, you're not? Okay.
No. So our marriage ended a few years ago. We are very close. He is a good, wonderful man. It didn't end for any reason other than we just both had some stuff that, that we needed to work on.
Yeah.
But he was such a good man. And I am so grateful for the healing work I did with her because that's why I was able to meet a man who was good and who was kind. And for the first time in my life, I had been treated with love and respect by a man when I married my second husband. And it was just a beautiful experience for me to have that because I had never had that as a woman, as a girl, ever.
Yeah, that's great.
Yeah.
So what else happened on your healing journey for you then? So you did all that work with her. What other things did you do?
So there were a lot of things I did. I think when it comes to like a healing journey in general, I think it really starts with going inward. And that means time alone. And I think sometimes people really struggle with time alone. And this is like a big
Especially
thing.
If they are struggling.
Yes.
Because then there's no one to nowhere but themselves, you know?
And that's a scary place to go.
Yeah.
Is to be by yourself when you don't love yourself.
Yeah.
It's scary. It's hard work. It's not easy. I remember nights just crying and crying myself to sleep and being alone and not knowing how to navigate that time. I'd never had this kind of time alone, but I used it very intentionally. And this is like a big part of what I'm trying to teach in my course that I'm putting together too, is like, use this time intentionally. Like healing is intentional work. We don't just accidentally heal. And the important thing about being intentional with healing is you're going to need to heal again, right? Like when I went through my second divorce a few years ago, it was incredibly painful. And I am so grateful that I had this healing foundation because I was able to heal in such a beautiful way from that.
Yeah.
And it wasn't bad and it wasn't toxic. It was very calm and it was very peaceful. And it gave me a beautiful life that I have now that I love so much. But that all began with that healing journey.
I think that's so important. And it's such good advice too, to be willing to be by yourself.
Yeah.
You know, because it's obviously when you're going through challenging times, it's easier to be with other people and people who are fun to be around. But if you just keep putting it off, you're never going to heal.
Yeah.
And then it's just going to come back bigger and worse.
Exactly. And I think this is something that happens so much for people is they take one trauma to the next trauma. And then they take that trauma to the next trauma because they never stop, push pause, and heal from what they need to heal from. Because we're always going to go through something. Something's going to happen, a death, a separation, a loss, you lose a job, whatever, right? Like things come up that we need to heal from. And I think it's just so important to like take time and find time that works for you. For me, that's in the morning. I love morning time. The world's asleep. I'm awake. It's quiet. And that gives me that introspective time. In fact, I think 90% of my book was written between 5 and 7 a.m.
Really?
Yeah, because that's when that's my creative time. That's when I think. That's when I process at a very deep level.
Yeah, my brain's usually a lot faster in the mornings than any other time of day, for
Same
sure.
with me.
Okay, so you had shared some statistics when I was listening to your podcast with Derek that I wanted to share on the podcast. You said 1 in 5 girls get sexually abused, right? Is that the right number?
That 1 in 5.
And I think you said 3 out of 4 is from someone that they know.
From someone that they know. To me, that is it's a painful statistic.
It's a terrifying statistic. When I heard that, it was like, oh my God. 20%. That is just way too high of a number.
You think about, I have 4 daughters. When I think about the fact that one of them, 2 of them could go down this road, like it's just so painful to think about and not getting help, not having awareness for what this is.
Well, it's scarier too when it's someone that you know and trust.
Yeah.
You know, because then I think that shatters so much more of your belief in just people as a whole. Because when it's someone you love and trust that takes advantage of you, then I think that makes it much more difficult to love and trust people in the future.
Oh, I definitely agree with that. And not only that, but when it's someone that you know and trust, there's so much confusion that comes along with that because that's where you really start to question yourself even more because it's someone that, wait a minute, this person I love and I really trust this person. Did I do something wrong? Is this my fault? Because it can't be their fault, so it must be my fault. And so it creates so much self-doubt, so many self-esteem issues. I had so many self-esteem issues for so many years. And I think now that's why I'm such a big proponent of loving yourself, choosing yourself, being your best advocate, because for so many years, I wasn't that. I didn't have a voice.
And what's your advice for what can we do as like a society or as parents? Like how can we best navigate this reality?
So here is my top advice for parents with young kids is I think that open dialogue about, first of all, sex. Okay. And I grew up in a home where my parents never talked to me about sex. And if I think back, if just one thing could have changed that would have made this situation better, it would have been an open dialogue about sex because I never talked to my parents about sex. Like all I knew was sex was bad. You don't have sex until you're married. So when the sexual occurrence happened in my life, all of a sudden it was so taboo, right?
Yeah.
It was so bad. There was no space for me to ever be able to
Yeah, it
talk
was even
about
like worse because then it felt like you
Yes.
said, you're going to hell.
So I think as parents, if we can have open conversations, open dialogues with our kids about sex, because sex is not a bad thing. It's a beautiful, wonderful thing.
Like even with our kids who are 7 and 10 now, we told them from the very beginning, like we didn't use like cute names for their private parts. It was like,
Yes.
you have a penis and your sister has a vagina. And they knew that from as soon as they could talk because I wanted them to know, like if someone did touch or look at or do anything inappropriate, they know that like those are their parts and that's not allowed, you know?
It's so important to just have that open dialogue. And because I think had that open dialogue been there and then this thing happened, I even would have felt more comfortable going to my mom and talking to her about it. But we never ever had one conversation about sex. So I would never talk to her about that.
Well, what's crazy too is so growing up, my godfather, he had a brother who I loved when I was a kid. He was awesome. He got arrested by the FBI for having like all this child pornography on his computer. Wow. So it's like, I don't know if he ever acted on it, but certainly he was in that space. And that was a person I was around. And then we had a family friend of ours who actually lived at my in-laws for a while. And he is in jail now because he sexually assaulted his girlfriend's daughter.
Oh my God.
Who was about 12, I think. But like our kids were around him all the time, you know? And it wouldn't have been out of the question for us to, like, if he was at the house and we had to go somewhere, like, oh, you're fine, you can stay here, you know?
Right.
You just never know. Like, neither of those situations would I ever have thought that this person was capable of those things, and they're in your life. And so you always kind of think like, oh, that's not going to happen to me, you know? But here's 2 instances that, and one that was recent, where our kids were around him all the time.
You never know. You never know. So I think all you can do as a parent is provide, one, as safe as a home as you can for your children, but have that dialogue, have that open conversation. So if something does happen, they have the space that they feel like they can come to you and talk to you about what's going on. I think that's just so important now.
Yeah. Yeah, when we talked a little bit off camera too, that like my kids have never had a sleepover, you know, and growing up as a kid, I had sleepovers every weekend, you know, I was like,
That's what we did in the 80s and 90s.
Yeah, like that's every single weekend, you know, no joking aside. But my kids now have never had one. I don't know when they will, because it's like you just never know.
If I had kids right now, like if I was starting a family right now, I would put a hard no on sleepovers because I think so many things happen at sleepovers. It's not good.
You know, because it could be anyone.
Yep.
An older brother or a brother's friend that's over. Like, you just never know.
It's just so prevalent. And I think just being very intentional as a parent, having those conversations, talking openly, giving your kids space to ask questions, those kind of things can make or break whether or not they're going to hold stuff in. Because like, and I even said this on Derek's podcast, like, Derek asked me, what do you think the worst part of this was? And I was like, it wasn't even the abuse, to be honest. It was the fact that it never got dealt with, right? Yeah. Things in life are going to happen, right? Things are going to come up. It's your ability, like the ability that you have or the space that you have to deal with the trauma or whatever is going to come up. That's the most important part.
Yeah, I mean, had you met your therapist at 13 instead of 31, how different would your life be?
How different would my life be?
Yeah.
Yeah.
What about for boys? So that statistic was for girls, right?
Yeah.
Do you know? Like,
I don't know, and I'm not going to try and speak to that because I didn't really look that up. I was just more looking at the girl statistic, but I'm sure it's not good either. But I don't know it.
I wonder if it's more frequent in girls than boys, but I know that it happens in both.
Yes, absolutely. I think so.
So what's your hope now? So what all spaces do you want to be in to try and be a voice for this community? Like, if someone is listening to this podcast and they've heard your story and they are a young girl or an older woman who had that happen to them and they haven't healed yet, like, are you available? What advice do you have for them? What's the best thing they can do?
Yeah, I love that question. So I'd say, first of all, go to a good therapist. She changed my life, right? There are people that are trained to know how to talk about childhood trauma, to know how to get it out of you. I needed someone trained in that to get that out of me. So I think first and foremost, that's really important. Like, if you need to really do that deep work, go to someone who knows how to do that deep work. I'm putting together an amazing healing course. That's really something that people can do from home, what to do, how to go inward, how to do that work on your own as well, which is so important because it's not just therapy. Like I tell people this all the time. Had I just gone to my therapist twice a week, I never would have got what I got out of it. It was the fact that I went home and I did the work at home.
Yeah.
So I think those two things are so equally important. I would love to help people. I'm actually in the process right now of finding some really good therapist resources for people. I've had so many people reach out to me.
I bet.
So I'm working on that right now. And then, of course, I want to be a resource. I'm not a therapist. I'm never going to be a therapist.
Yeah.
I mean, I've had enough therapy where maybe that could count as a degree. No, I'm just kidding. But no, I'm not a therapist. But I do want to help people with those resources and what can I do to help people heal. Those are the things I'm passionate about and what I'm working on my own as well.
I think that's awesome. Do you have a plan for when your course is going to be out?
Yes, it's coming out January 11th.
Oh, so
It's
soon.
very soon, yes.
Okay, let's see. This episode is going to be out. Let's see.
Sorry,
Today's-
super quick for the audience. So 1 in 4 girls, and then 1 in 13 boys.
Oh,
Sorry.
Wow.
1 in 13.
The
Okay.
question was posed, so I thought I'd help.
Yeah,
No,
that's
thank
great.
you.
Thank you for sharing
Wow.
that. Well, this episode will come out almost when your course comes out.
Perfect.
Might be like the week after.
Okay.
So then, how is it going to be? Where's that course going to be?
It's
at?
going to be on Instagram. So if they
Okay.
go to my Instagram handle, which is Healthy Aimee,
Okay.
Aimee.
Okay.
So if they go to my Instagram handle, the link will be right on there.
Okay.
And
I'll put that in the show notes too. So if you're listening to this and you want to do that course, I'll put it in there.
Yeah.
Do you know what it's going to cost yet?
No, still working on
Okay.
some details like that. I definitely want to make it affordable for anybody. So
Yeah.
this isn't something for me where I'm like, it's going to be thousands and thousands. It's nothing like that. It's
Yeah.
going to be like, obviously, like there's going to be huge value here. There's going to be 21 modules. Like there's going to be a lot of content, a lot of information. So there's a lot of value here. But I'm going to price it in a way where someone who's at home who needs to heal, maybe someone who can't afford a year of therapy like I could back then, can actually get help and get resources.
Yeah, that's interesting. I actually had that thought too. And you said you're going twice a week. I was thinking that had to be pretty expensive.
Well, thankfully, the miracle of that was that my husband at the time, had really good health insurance. And so I was like, I'm going to get in as much therapy before this thing's final. So I definitely took advantage of his health insurance policy.
Oh, good for you.
Yeah.
And how long? So that course is 21 modules. Is it like a module a week, or like what's the timeline that it's going to take someone?
Still working on kind of that timeline. I think it's really going to be more like self-paced. So like you have someone that dives into that's like, I really want to do this work. I've got time to do it. Like I'm going to dive in. They could probably get through it in a month or two. And then there's going to be other people that are like, I'm going to do a module a week, and then it's going to go longer. So I think it's really going to depend on where they're at the time.
And is it abuse specific, or is it just healing in general?
No, it's not. Really doesn't have that much to do with abuse. It's just more about healing, because that really is the platform that I'm about. It's like, yes, this happened to me as a child. That's one event in my life, right?
Yeah.
I've also had other events in my life I've needed to heal from. And so my passion that I'm passionate about is we're always going to be healing from something. So do the work. So how can I help people do the work so they can constantly be working on themselves, healing from stuff that comes up? And even like day to day, like I have days where I'm like, oh my gosh, my anxiety, I'm stressed out. I use these healing practices in my day-to-day life every single day. Meditation, journaling, doing things that really get me out of a state of stress or panic into a state of like flow and energy and things like that.
What do you do for your day job?
So I do sales. I do what we call high ticket sales. So I actually work from home, which is lovely.
Yeah.
I work for an amazing real estate broker out of Utah. Actually, she's phenomenal. She has an amazing coaching program. So I sell her coaching program. So I love it. I love selling something that I'm passionate about. I love selling something that helps other people. And I think that's just everything I do is about like, how can I have great conversations and help people change their life?
Yeah, because it just seems like you're a go-getter. And I heard that you did a bunch of Ironmans. And
Yeah. 2022 was kind of like the year of the Ironman, we'll call it.
and you did 5?
I did 5. So I did 5 between like the middle of 2022 through the middle of this year. So like May of 22 to June of 23, I did 5 Ironman.
Had you always been a fitness person, or was that like a new thing in your life?
I've been into fitness for a very long time, and it really kind of started actually after I had my first daughter and I saw my body change for the first time in my life.
Yeah.
I gained 50 pounds with my first pregnancy, and I was like, oh no, we're not doing this. And so I just started getting into like kind of a fitness journey, started running, ran my first marathon right after she was born. And that really got me into kind of the fitness space a bit. So I actually taught cycling for about 9 years. I taught yoga.
Oh, wow.
I taught body combat. So I've always
Body
loved,
combat?
Yeah, I taught body combat.
Like
It was super
fighting?
fun. No, it was more of like it was a less meals program. So it was more for like women that want to like do kickboxing and stuff like that.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. They called it body combat.
That seems pretty serious.
I know. No, it was not that serious. So I've loved fitness my whole life. It's definitely been a big passion of mine. And then
Is that a part of your healing, do you think?
absolutely. And I don't think fitness has to be a part of everyone's healing. It's definitely a part of mine because I'm passionate about it. But I will say this. When you're in tune with your body, you will heal faster.
Yeah.
Because you feel good. And I think feeling good is critical, whether that's, we're talking emotionally, mentally, or physically. So I'm very passionate about that. In fact, I talk a lot about that. I have a whole module in my course about healing your
Well,
body.
I think it's holistic, right? Like if your brain is healthy or if you're doing all this work on your brain and you're exercising, but you're eating shitty food, that's not optimal, right? And so it's like if you really want to have it all work, you kind of need everything going.
Yeah, because it's really about alignment, right? Like if I'm completely out of alignment with my body, that's going to make it a lot harder for me to stay in alignment emotionally or mentally, right? And so I think when you can have all those cylinders firing, right?
Yeah.
It makes such a big difference when it comes to healing.
So question for you then is, what would you say your why is right now? Like what is Aimee's purpose today?
I love that. My purpose today is I want to help people go from where they are now. Okay. And that might be completely broke. That might be somewhere in the middle. But to help people go from where they are now and how do I change my life? Because that's where I was for so many years.
Well, I guess even with your job, you get to help people do that, right? Because they're buying a course to become better at real estate. Is that what it would be for?
Better in life, better in real estate, better in their business, make more money, help their team grow.
Yeah.
There's so many things in my career that I get to help people with, which I love. And so it's like everything in my life is about how can I help people go from where they are now to where they want to be, whatever that looks like for them. Because for me, for so many years, and this is why I'm so passionate about it, is I was just stuck in what I almost call like no man's zone. Like I had no purpose. My life felt meaningless. Was I a mother and I loved being a mother? Yes. But here's the thing. When your life is only about being someone else's something, you need a purpose for you to wake up for you in the morning. And my life had no purpose, no meaning, and I was very unhappy for a lot of years. And so I love helping people figure that out. Who are they?
Well, I think that oftentimes people make the mistake of thinking like, I got to be there for everybody else.
Yep.
But it's like, if you don't show up for yourself first, the version of you that's showing up for everyone else is a lesser version anyways.
It's a lesser version. Absolutely. And do I love being my children's mother? Yes. Is that my identity? Absolutely not. And I think this is a mistake a lot of women make as well, is they make their identity about who are my children, and then they become very attached to who their children grow up being. And guess what? Your children are on their own journey.
It's so amazing with kids because they can have the exact same parents and the exact same upbringing, and then they're just so different.
So different.
And so, I mean, even for my wife, when we had our kids, and she was just a mom for a long time before she worked, and it was like she kind of got lost in that, you know?
It's easy
and so I
to
think
get
it's
lost.
important to find that thing for yourself too.
It's so important. And think about this too, like just even fast forwarding your mind, when your kids are grown and they leave the house, who are you then?
Yeah.
You got to be thinking about these things.
Well, I think that happened a lot. I can't remember what time frame would be exactly, but when women, for the most part, did stay at home and they were wives and mothers, right? And then when their kids left, they had like no. That's why I think grandmas used to look different, because like you think of a grandma like when we were younger, white hair, probably a perm, but grandmas don't look like that anymore because women have found now they have an opportunity to have so much more than just being in that household.
Yeah, and I will say I think that's one of the reasons I did end up leaving the LDS church is I really don't believe in this methodology of like women are put on this earth to be mothers. I do not believe that. Because if God put women on earth to be mothers, why didn't he give everyone the ability to be a mother?
Yeah.
And so I just believe like, do I love being a mother? Yes. Do I find incredible fulfillment in being a mother? Of course. I love my children more than anything in the world. But that does not define me. Who they are does not define me.
Yeah.
And I am my own person outside of that. And same thing if you're a wife and you feel like that's your identity or your career. I just feel like whenever your identity is associated with something outside of yourself, you will not know who you are.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's really good advice. So then next question for you is, I think it's important to have a big, hairy, audacious goal, something that's down the road a little bit, right? Not a New Year's resolution like what am I going to do in 2024, but where does Aimee want to be in 2027? What's that big thing you're working towards?
Oh my goodness, I wish I was more prepared for this question. I think that's hard for me to answer because so many of the things I'm working on right now have been fairly new in the sense of like,
Yeah.
hey, I'm diving into creating this and I'm creating this and I'm working on this. I know for a fact I want to sell 1 million copies of my book. I want to impact
there you go.
over 1 million people, like somehow, some way.
I love that.
That's what I want.
You didn't need to be prepared. That's a great answer.
I just came up with it. So
Sell
there we
1
go.
million
That's the
copies
goal.
of your book. That's great. Now you put it out there to the universe.
Okay, there we go.
So another thing I like to ask is, I think that we have intuitively more wisdom than we give ourselves credit for, and oftentimes we'll think we don't know the answer, but in fact we really do. And an exercise I like to do to kind of bring that to light is, what advice would your 85-year-old self give you today? So if you were 85 years old looking back on the Aimee that's sitting here across from me, what advice would that 85-year-old self give you?
Don't be scared, because it's scary to put yourself out there.
Yeah.
And I've thought about this so much with my book and the stories that are in my book. And
it is hard writing that, isn't it?
It's really hard writing it. And some of the things that are going to come out about the choices I made in my life are painful. And my course, and are people going to like it, right? So many question marks about everything I'm doing right now. And if my 80-year-old self could give myself advice right now, it's like, it doesn't matter what other people think. I'm doing this for me because it gives me purpose. It gives me fulfillment. And I want to change lives. And if I am authentic with my message, I will change lives.
I love that. Do you think it's easier for your book to come out now that your parents have passed?
100%. But I will say this. If they were still alive today, I would not be changing anything I'd be doing. I wouldn't have any different conversations that I'm having right now. And my therapist, and I talked about this on Derek's podcast, but she gave me some of the most beautiful advice that I am grateful for every day, which was, you need to share with your parents how their choices impacted your life. They need to know. And it took me months of work with her before I was finally willing to have those conversations with them. But I am so grateful that I did, because less than 2 years after those conversations, both of my parents passed away.
Oh, wow.
Within about a 7-month time frame of each other. And I don't even know how that would feel right now, to know that I had never shared that with my parents. And so that's, if I could give anybody advice, if there are people in your life you need to have those, I call them clearing conversations with, have them, because you never know when those opportunities will be taken from you. And those clearing conversations are part of your healing. Now, there may be people in your life that have already passed on and you've missed that opportunity. Write them a letter and burn it, or whatever.
Yeah.
But those conversations are really important.
How did your parents take that?
It was hard. They cried. I cried. But they were so sorry. They just didn't know how to do it better. And I know that. And that's why I have no anger. I have no frustration. It's just, they did the best that they could. And that's what we're all doing as parents, right? We're doing the very best that we can. And I heard this beautiful quote not long ago, and it said, I wish everybody understood that their parents were going through life for the first time too.
I know. I've seen that too. It's so great.
It's so great. I love
that your
it.
parents are parents for the first time also.
I know. This is my first time being a mom, you know? And so I think about that with my parents. They did the best that they could. And I even put myself in their shoes back in the 80s and 90s, right? There was no internet.
And they were in a church that was like, they did what the people they entrusted in the most told them to do, you know?
But we didn't have the resources then that we have now. We didn't have the internet and social media and all these conversations and podcasts and books and audio stuff. Like, we didn't have any of those resources back then. And so they did the very best that they could. And so when we had those conversations, it was so much sorrow that they didn't do it better.
Do you think they realized that? Do you think they were carrying that burden with them that whole time, knowing that or do you think that they kind of put it in the back of their minds too and forgot about it?
You know, when my marriage started ending, I remember having some very specific conversations with my dad, and my dad's like, I am so sorry. I didn't see this earlier. I'm so sorry you've been in pain for so long. And that was even before all this other stuff came out.
Yeah.
So I knew that they carried a burden there for sure. But when I did talk to them, it was heavy. These are not easy conversations to have, and I won't sit here and speak lightly of it. They were painful, but they were beautiful. And for my parents to be able to see that, it's okay. Like, I'm okay.
Yeah.
And I'm moving on with my life, but I just want you to know that this really had an impact on me, and I can let it go. Let's let it go. But it's so important to talk about it.
Did you keep a healthy relationship with your parents throughout your adulthood?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I had a great relationship with my parents, and I think that's part of the reason it took so long for this stuff to come out, is because it's like I did have a good relationship with my parents. It's not like I was always in this toxic thing going on where I was just like, what's going on in my life? I mean, I was in an unhealthy marriage, but my relationship with my parents was good.
That's great.
Yeah.
That's good that you were able to have that conversation. It's hard to have those courageous conversations.
It's so
hard.
hard.
But great for them that the fact that they did pass, they were able to pass with that closure.
Yeah.
Okay, so the next question is, I don't think you've read my book, right?
I haven't. I want
You
to
have-
read your
okay.
book for sure. I'm excited.
So the question I like to ask, and you can define this in whatever way that you want for you, but what's the biggest win you've ever had in your life?
Honestly, I think the biggest win I've ever had in my life is healing.
Yeah.
It's everything. It's who I am today. It's how I show up. It's how I live my life. It's how I show up for my kids, for everybody in my life. It's what I'm doing. It's what I'm choosing to be, to do. And it all started with choosing to heal.
Yeah.
Choosing to get help. That's the biggest win, because I wouldn't even be anywhere right now without that win.
Yeah, it's so interesting to think about what would it look like had you not started your healing journey,
Would I still be in that marriage?
Yeah.
Would it still be toxic living? Would it be more horrible choices? Probably all of that.
Yeah. Well, that's a great answer. Well, then the opposite of that is, what's the biggest loss you've ever had?
Probably when my second marriage ended. It was really hard.
Yeah.
I loved him dearly. He loved me a lot. And but it needed to end for so many reasons. But it now, 3 years later, I'm so grateful for it. I think if we truly look at our biggest loss, most people can feel gratitude still for it, for the lessons that came from it.
100%. That's what's so powerful about the question, is that almost everyone's answer is, but.
That's the thing. It's like there's so many buts associated with that loss,
Yeah.
because he grew, he evolved, I grew, I evolved, our kids grew and evolved. Our lives are better for it. We have a beautiful relationship now. But at the time, it was excruciating.
Yeah. Do you aspire to find another husband, or like where are you at on that journey for you?
You know what? It's just not my focus.
Yeah.
My focus right now is all the things that I'm working on that I'm passionate about. I know when I choose that to be my focus, I'll choose it and I'll find it.
Yeah.
But that's not my focus.
So no pressure if you don't feel, that's good. Okay. So then what is your favorite and most impactful book you've ever read?
Oh goodness. That's a really good question. I would probably say, oh gosh, there are so many cool books that I've read. There's a book, and I'm trying to even remember the title because I haven't read it for so long, but it was by John Maxwell.
Okay. Yeah. John Maxwell's great.
I love everything that man's ever written.
Yeah. He's good.
But there was a book I read a long time ago, and I remember it was kind of like during this part of my healing journey where I was just like finding me.
That's interesting too, because John Maxwell's like, he writes business books.
He writes business books and leadership books. And at the time I was doing some business stuff. And so that's how I found this book.
Yeah.
But there was so much like self awareness, self acknowledgement, because that's a big part of like what he talks about too, is like own your stuff, right?
Don't be a victim.
Don't be a victim. And so I think at the time it really had an impact on me, because I was just starting to kind of evolve out of this victim mentality. And so it had a huge impact on me. I will have to get you the name of the book. It's been a minute since I read
Well,
it.
any John Maxwell book is good.
Yeah,
So.
his stuff is phenomenal. Yeah.
Okay, so then the last question is, how do you define success?
Be true to you. Be your true, authentic self, because when you show up as you, no matter what it is that you're doing, what it is that you're working on, it's going to be a success.
Do you find that hard to show up as yourself?
Not when you know yourself.
Yeah.
When you don't know yourself, it's incredible. It's almost impossible.
Yeah. And how do you get to a place that you do know yourself?
You spend time alone, first of all.
Yeah.
You're not going to find yourself with everybody else around. That's just not where it's going to happen.
Right.
Will you find pieces of yourself? Sure. But you find yourself in those dark, quiet, lonely moments where it's just you and nobody else. And you have to really look in the mirror and say, who am I? Who do I want to be? How do I want to show up today? Can I go to sleep at night and put my head on the pillow and feel so good about who I am and how I showed up today. Having integrity, having authenticity in your life, to me, that's success.
And do you feel like you've done that for yourself?
Absolutely.
That's awesome.
And that's what I want to teach. That's what I'm so passionate about.
I love that. Okay, so is there anything you want to leave the audience with then?
I just think the biggest thing is just if you're listening to this and there's just something in your life that's just, you can't figure out why is this not working or why is it always going bad or what's going on, there's something there to uncover, probably multiple things to uncover, and just do the work. Do the work and figure out what you need to figure out so you can be happy.
Yeah, I love that. If there is a pattern in your life that you deem to be not healthy or not productive, there's something that's causing that pattern.
Patterns are real. And I did not learn about patterns until I started working with that therapist. And man, did I uncover some major patterns going on in my life. And it was eye-opening for me.
Well, Aimee, thank you so much for being here and being vulnerable and sharing your story. I think it's an important message and one that we've not talked about yet on this podcast, but I really appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you so much for having me. I love the conversation.
Okay. Have a good one.
Thank you.